Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to have been asked to introduce this very important item on today's agenda, the follow-up to Rio Plus 20 and the post-2015 development agenda. I'm also mildly surprised and impressed that the ECE should offer this slot to an NGO, and particularly an NGO that is known to have been critical of intergovernmental process. From that, I'm sure you will understand that you can expect a challenging talk. I've been asked to confine my thoughts to a 10-minute slot to enable interactive discussion, and I look forward to that discussion very much. As a result, you will understand that it won't be possible to make a considered assessment of Rio Plus 20 and what it achieved. Instead, I intend to focus on a few really important lessons that I think Rio Plus 20 taught us. But just to say, in looking back at Rio and in discussing Rio after the event with many people from the government sector, from business, from civil society, it's clear to me that what you think of Rio Plus 20 depends on what you expected, and it also depends very much on what you thought Rio Plus 20 was. Because if you took it to be a large room in which government representatives thrashed out an outcome text, then I think you can be forgiven if you were slightly disappointed at the content of that outcome document. But if, like many people, and myself included, you look at Rio as a coming together of a whole constituency, a whole community dedicated to sustainable development, and that beyond the government negotiations, there were a range of formal and informal meetings at which a huge amount of energy, huge amount of goodwill, huge amount of innovation was in evidence, then you will have a very different view of what Rio actually was. I think, in a nutshell, what Rio left us with is a dual consideration or a dual challenge. On the first side, I think it must be clear to everybody now that we cannot depend for our future progress towards sustainability essentially on global level intergovernmental negotiation. We must go beyond that. We must find other ways of making progress towards sustainability, or we are unlikely to achieve our goals. The second consideration, though, is that the challenge is with us to harness the amazing amount of energy and goodwill, as I said before, that was evident in Rio among governments, but also in the wider sustainable development community. A real will, a real desire to move forward, a real will to progress towards sustainable development that was evident to anybody who was in Rio. So let me underline three important lessons that I think we can take from the Rio experience in light of the two challenges that I've set out. The first is that I think if we are to progress towards sustainable development, we will have to put equity right at the center of our agenda. If you look at the intergovernmental world, where things have slowed down, where things are almost impossible to progress, you will always find that at the center of the contentious issues are issues relating to equity. If you look at the climate change negotiations, they are stuck around issues of climate justice, of relative responsibility. They're all stuck around issues that involve equity. The same is true of the World Trade Organization's Doha negotiations. The developing countries have made it clear that they are not prepared to go forward and adopt a package unless it genuinely addresses the difference between those who are in a strong trading position and those who are in a weak one. Rio Plus 20 itself made progress on a number of issues, but the ones that were genuinely stuck, the ones on which it proved almost impossible to make progress, were those that related to equity. I think we're guilty, all of us, certainly us from the sustainable development community, of overstressing the importance of the environment. Important as it is not the only consideration. And I think that the perception has developed that sustainable development is about bringing green into the economy. And the very term green economy perpetuates that, unfortunately. Instead, I think we will progress if we focus very centrally on the need to provide social justice, the need to provide employment, protection of livelihoods, and the inclusion of those who are currently marginalized. The second lesson is that I think we need to widen our lens in terms of the actors and mechanisms available to make progress. We should ask ourselves not, what do we do at Rio Plus 25 or what do we do at Rio Plus 30? We should ask ourselves, where in the international landscape of institutions and processes is momentum actually building? Where are things developing? Where is positive progress being made? And get behind that. Where should we put our efforts? Should we put them into yet another Conference of the Parties, yet another Rio global gathering? Or should we look at areas where things are genuinely happening at a fast pace and very positively? And what topics should we get behind? What topics are ripe to move? If you look at the Rio agenda, it covered everything, but not everything is ripe to move. Should we not be standing behind those issues where a little effort could bring genuine progress? And for example, and it was mentioned in a number of the keynotes this morning, the need to reform perverse subsidies, particularly subsidies to fossil fuels. So where do we look beyond the intergovernmental global processes? Well, we're in one example right here. I think the potential for progress at the regional level and progress that can then build through the building blocks up to a global agreement is much more evident than addressing the global level directly. And if you look at the progress made in APEC, for example, in adopting a list of environmental goods to be liberalized, something that's proved impossible in the WTO, you have a good example of this. The second is that there is enormous potential at the level of subnational jurisdictions. What's happening among regions confederating, like the R20 movement, or what's happening among megacities. If you look at the C40, large cities committed to climate action, actually it's a lot more than 40 now, you really get the sense that there is a possibility of progressing very quickly in that arena while we wait for international consensus to gather. What's happening in the private sector is also very exciting. We all know the work of the World Environmental Forum, but their global agenda councils are making progress on a number of issues. We should be focusing on areas where the private sector meets around their own challenges, like the Clean Energy Ministerial or the World Future Energy Summit. And then, of course, we need to think afresh about the role of civil society. We're well known as being a thorn in the side, and that's a very important role that we play. But beyond that, there's a huge potential for us to be implementers, to be a big and important part of the accountability mechanisms that we all know are necessary. The third lesson is that I think there's a duty to show leadership. That if the entire world community is not prepared to move ahead at the pace we would like it to, those who are ready to move ahead should move ahead if necessarily unilaterally. The potential for positive unilateral action is enormous, and we barely scratched the surface. Now, just to give you an example, if China were to announce that henceforth it would only buy wood from FSC or equivalent certified sources, that action alone would change the face of world forestry. China being the largest importer of wood and wood products. There are examples like that where a small leverage could lead to a complete change in the way the game is played. Similarly, if countries decide that they want to take a lead, they want to get out ahead of the markets on clean energy technology, they would be giving themselves a comparative advantage in a world that we know is coming, in a world that has to come. They would give themselves that lead. And if you look at the green economy, a subject you're discussing here, the green economy was enabled by Rio, and it's regarded as one of Rio's successes, and I agree with that. But at the same time, putting the green economy into place, making it a reality, is something that has to happen at the national level, and each country has to find the appropriate path to get there. And it has to be made inclusive. It has to address the social issues and demonstrate that a green economy is not just about doing better on the environment, but it's about creating an economy of a different style that through its very functioning offers and delivers social justice, offers and delivers environmental responsibility. So in conclusion, let me say, if we look at our mechanisms now for global governance or governance of our major international issues, we're faced with a serious challenge. One of my colleagues defined governance or said that in judging mechanisms for governance, we need to ask two questions. Are they at the dimension of the problems that they're trying to deal with? And where they are they evolving at a pace that enables them to keep up with the problems as they themselves evolve? And I think if we look back at Rio, we can come to the conclusion that incremental change is not enough. Incremental change is not going to take us where we need to go at a sufficient pace. And so we need to think much bigger. We need to think in terms of transformative change. We need to think in terms of what actions we can take that are ripe to move now that, if taken, could genuinely change the game. And finally, and I call for this very deliberately in this region that is responsible for so much of the positive environmental and social progress we've seen over the past few decades, the world is in very bad need of leadership, bad need of regions and countries that will have the courage to take initiative and carry it forward. And I think that the world is looking very much at this region to do so. Thank you.